G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with part 2 of an epidemic of ink, the toxicity of tattoos.
Everybody's scribbling all over him, you know, and it's rampant.
Nick Carcinogenic says every day he's seeing people asking to have their backyard tattoos fixed.
Last night 2 underage girls came in here with 2 bad tattoos that a friend of theirs had done with a eBay tattoo kit. It was just terrible, terrible work.
What was it like? What did they have?
One had a diamond on her arm. It was crooked. They'd gone that deep. The ink had bled underneath the skin. And the other one was supposed to be a pyramid, and I don't know what part of it was a pyramid, but it was terrible.
What did the girls say? How did they come to get a tattoo like that?
Just their friend was going to do it for them for nothing, and they weren't old enough to go to a licensed shop, so they thought they'd be able to get a tattoo. And now they've got to pay to get them fixed, but they've got to wait till they're 18 to get done in our shop or any shop.
How old are they?
They were 16, I believe.
If the tattoos can't be fixed, they can be removed, although it's painful and expensive and can leave ugly marks. Tattoo removal is a growth industry, and as we'll hear, it's also poorly regulated across the country. Nick Carcinogenic wife Tracy runs the tattoo removal side of their business, and she is licensed to use the laser machine. A large number of her customers are people who've gone to parties and after a few beers on a Saturday night have let their mates tattoo them.
Wow, that's crazy, you know, but these people do it and like, oh, I was drunk and I didn't know what he was doing. And
how common is that?
Really common. You hear of it a lot. And kids coming in with really, really bad, you know, we had a young boy come in here with a completely tattooed sleeve, outlined sleeve, which was quite traumatic. You know, he was a 14-year-old boy who had a really bad outline covering his whole sleeve. You know, that was really, really hard to deal with.
A big immediate risk with backyard jobs, apart from a really bad tattoo, is infection.
Hey, g'day.
You doing
Max, is it?
No, I'm Scott. Matt's out back.
Oh, right.
Jump on in.
When you walk into Matt Cunnington's West Side Tattoo Studio in suburban Brisbane, the place smells heavily of antiseptic. Stopping diseases isn't just a matter of making sure needles are clean.
What is the tattooist touching while they're working? What are you sitting on? What, you know, really everything needs to have some sort of throwaway barrier on it, sort of like Dexter's Kill Room. You just sort of fold it all up at the end and put it in the bin.
The big infection risk everyone's worried about is hepatitis B and C, which in Australia are much bigger killers than HIV/AIDS. They're the leading cause of liver cancer. This is a really big issue as the tattoo industry tries to build a cleaner, more professional image. Matt Cunnington says he'd like to see more regulations to clamp down on dodgy operators.
And due to the lack of regulations, anyone can pretty much just turn up, do the cross-contamination course and prove that their building has hand basins and a vinyl floor and open up a tattoo shop. You know, it's much more difficult to become a hairdresser than it is a tattooist, and the amount of damage that you can do as a tattooist doesn't grow out in 3 days.
Unlike a hairdo, tattoos aren't easy to fix. Tattoo removal now usually involves big, expensive lasers called Q-switch machines. They can work really well, but it's expensive, about 4 times the cost of getting a tattoo in the first place. Lasers break up the ink under the skin and send it off through the body to be digested and expelled naturally.
It's basically blowing apart the ink. You get the idea if you're getting that little bit of explosion.
But if you have an allergy to a tattoo, laser removal isn't the best option because that can cause anaphylactic shock. Mary Dingley is a Brisbane cosmetic physician.
Now, if you just laser that, you could actually create quite a bad allergic reaction for that person, perhaps even something called anaphylaxis where they can collapse. Now, there may be some things that we can do to avoid that, but to be totally safe, they might even decide to cut out at least the red part of that tattoo to avoid that kind of allergic reaction.
The trouble is that the tattoo removal industry in Australia is a regulatory mess. In Queensland, you need to be trained to get a licence, but in New South Wales, you don't need a licence at all. Just about anyone can go onto the internet, buy a cheap laser from China and open a shop.
Probably the worst thing I've seen is the superheating of the ink. And what happens is the ink then basically becomes this boggy liquid mass, a bit like mercury at room temperature. And the skin over the ink heals, but it sits under there like a sort of blancmange, for want of a better description.
The president of the Cosmetic Physicians Society of Australasia is Gabrielle Caswell, and she's on a mobile phone from Western New South Wales.
Really, it's a bit of a free-for-all. And people say, well, what's the problem with it? Well, the problem with it is that at the end of the day, if we end up with this huge boggy mass on someone's arm or leg or their back, they end up in the public health system to have it fixed.
The Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA, is working on nationally consistent rules for the use of lasers. In the meantime, Gabrielle Caswell says she knows of a carpenter who's branched out into the tattoo removal business. His cases come to her.
As I point out to them, why did you go to a carpenter to have a medical procedure?
And what do they say?
Well, they say to me, if it was so dangerous and it would be harming people, I thought the government wouldn't allow them to do it. And it's not a bad logic when you think about our system of medical management, our system of, legal responsibility.
People think that if someone's allowed to do laser tattoo removal, the government must have approved it. It's the same assumption people make about tattoo inks, that they must be safe, otherwise why would the government allow them to be injected into the skins of millions of people? Researcher Maya Underwood has spent years looking at tattoo social trends and also has a few tattoos herself.
I think probably a lot of people are like myself and are naive enough to think that these things are regulated and that we are being kept safe. Whether we are or not, maybe you can tell me. Because, yes, I'm not sure that the regulation is as thorough as perhaps we presume it is.
In fact, the regulation of tattoo inks is almost non-existent. They're not considered cosmetics or food or medicine. Tattoo inks are industrial chemicals and assessed by the National Industrial Chemicals Notification and Assessment Scheme, or NICNAS. NICNAS is mainly concerned with the handling of potentially toxic chemicals, not the injection of them into people. We asked for a clarification of the status of tattoo inks from NICNAS and the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and we've put their responses on the Background Briefing website. Essentially, tattoo inks, as things people consume, are in a regulatory black hole. It's well known in the tattoo industry, though, that some inks, especially those bought on eBay, are dangerous. One of Queensland's most experienced tattooists is Mick Kosenko.
Some of the stuff from China, you don't know what's in it, There could be mercury. A lot of ink contains mercury in plastic, and these kids don't know what they're buying. A lot of the stuff from England, Europe and the USA is all approved by the government before they're allowed to sell it.
That's what people assume. But the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, doesn't approve tattoo inks. Marie Ledger is a dermatologist in New York.
The FDA doesn't regulate the inks at all. The FDA regulates cosmetics, and it does regulate color additives in cosmetics. So even though, the FDA has limited, for example, the amount of lead and mercury and, compounds like that in cosmetics, and that's kind of trickled down into what's permitted in tattoo inks, no substances are approved to be injected in the skin.
The Council of Europe does have what's called the Resolution for the Safety of Tattoos and Permanent Makeup. There, inks containing metals and carcinogens can be banned or recalled. Many of the inks that have been recalled in Europe are being used in Australia. Brisbane tattooist Matt Cunnington.
You can get onto the EU recall website and look up the inks that are being recalled, and they're all things that everybody used in the 90s. These pigments that they call it a predispersed pigment. A pigment traditionally turned up as a powder and you mixed it up yourself. And then we started to see these ink that, wouldn't sort of break apart into all its constituent layers, and it's not like acrylic paint.
One of the inks recalled in Europe that's still available here is Intense Banana Cream. Here's what the European Council says on its website about that ink.
The product poses a chemical risk because it contains azo dyes, releasing up to 1,753 milligrams per kilogram of the aromatic amine oanisodine, which is a substance classified as carcinogenic, mutagenic and toxic.
We contacted the Australian distributor of Inten's banana cream and were told the bottle of ink that we bought might have been an imitation, and that there are lots of fake inks being sold as popular brands on eBay. The point is, though, that no one's regulating this. Consumers have no idea what they're buying. We heard earlier that some tattoo inks contain known carcinogens. Some, especially the black ones, also contain nanoparticles. These are so small that they can pass through cell walls, and there's increasing health concerns about nanoparticles. Jorgen Syrup says it appears that black tattoo inks are almost pure nanoparticles.
They are 99% nanoparticles. And these particles can creep around in the organism. They can even pass to the brain. They have a special, a route of spreading inside the body. They can concentrate in certain organs such as the spleen and the liver.
Professor Syrup is investigating whether nanoparticles from tattoo ink are responsible for cases of vertigo that he's seen in some of his patients. In Australia, the environmental group Friends of the Earth has been pushing for a moratorium on nanoparticles in products like sunscreen. It's now widened that to tattoo inks. Louise Sales is the organisation's nanotechnology project coordinator.
The problem with these kind of epidemiological things is if there's actually nobody looking for an effect, then it could be years down the track before one's discovered. And with the huge incidence of people being tattooed now, I think it's about 25% of young people have tattoos now, we could be looking at a huge public health impact down the track. We think it's really important that the government takes a precautionary approach now and properly regulates the use of these chemicals.
We now know that at least some tattoo inks in Australia contain toxic chemicals, including carcinogens. More research is needed to understand what the long-term health effects of those are. Anyone wanting to get a tattoo should know what's in the ink and what the risks might be, so that they can at least make some sort of informed choice. Gabrielle Caswell.
And it's not about stopping people or being anti-tattoo. It's about if you make that choice, let's make it a safe choice for you, because you don't want them getting something nasty from having the tattoo down the line 20 years later.
Background Briefing's coordinating producer is Linda McGuinness. Research by Anna Whitfeld. Technical production by Andrei Shabanov. The executive producer is Chris Bullock, and I'm Ian Townsend.
Okay, isn't that interesting? At least I find it particularly interesting. Because, you see, I take a bit of an old school view of tattoos. I did my psychiatry and psychology lectures in Block 3A of training as a general nurse back in 1983, that would have been. And we were taught about neurotic personality disorders, in which overt perceived anxiety is not so much a feature. And one of these neurotic personality disorders was antisocial personality disorder, and they showed us a movie by Bowlby Bowlby which meticulously documented a young baby boy going into hospital for a hernia operation, going through maternal deprivation syndrome, which the Bowlbys had figured out was a predictable set of events. And as the end credits rolled on the movie, the information was given that several weeks after being discharged from hospital, the kid had thrown himself under a double-decker bus and been killed while shopping. And Bowlby had come under a heap of flack back in 1961 or whatever, 59, whenever they released the film, because they had known how much damage was being done to the baby by the traumatic maternal deprivation syndrome in the first 3 years. And yet they just followed along and made the film, because they knew they had to make the film in order to cut through the weight of medical inertia. Okay, so the story was in the early 80s that traumatic maternal deprivation syndrome led to antisocial personality disorder, and that a sign, a visible sign, was self-inflicted wounds, scarification, homemade tattoos, even to some degree professional tattooing was considered a sign, visible sign, you can see it from across the room, a sign of possible antisocial personality disorder. And to nail down the diagnosis, you needed to have a clinical history of traumatic maternal deprivation syndrome during the first 3 years and a criminal record with the police. So I've always had the idea that it's a dumb idea, especially if you are a bit out there on the lunatic fringe, it's a dumb idea to have a tattoo because it advertises the fact. Yeah? I have no tattoos. But I really wish I'd heard this background briefing broadcast about a month, 2 months before they actually put it to air. Would have been very bloody useful, because, as I've told a lot of people on many occasions, I don't have a television here on the Endangered Species Sanctuary. I've now got a video monitor and I can watch movies, but I used to read books to my kids. And my daughter, for her 23rd birthday, decided to get her first ever tattoo. And that's the photo of it that she sent me. It's not actually a coloured tattoo. The pinks and the greens and the blues are the bruising and bleeding because that was taken straight after she'd had a black tattoo on her white skin. Books, because reading is close to her heart. So, polyaromatic, polycyclic multi-chain aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. And of course, black ink, soot. Something that doesn't fade, doesn't bleach. Yeah, right. I'm just pleased that she hasn't got red and green and blue as well. So, you know, she's only got a minor risk of increased carcinogenesis, but because it's a professionally done tattoo, cost $150, it's into the layer of not reproducing skin cells. It's into the fibrous layer. So hopefully she hasn't killed herself by getting a tattoo for her 23rd birthday. And everything that old mate said about asepsis, yes, when she was 16 and she was going to get her tongue pierced, rather than let some other idiot go and sign the consent form and not know what they were looking at, I went and held her hand for her first tongue piercing. A lot of people, a lot of parents wouldn't have done it, but I tell you what, my stock as a parent in her estimation and my level of communication skyrocketed after I went and held her hand and kept her safe from any kind of contamination during the procedure. The toxicology of tattoo ink. Warbles on a lot of YouTube. Ciao.